Hey there, everybody. It's Carpo again. You know, I grew up listening to music. I love music. And I guess a lot of people love music, so that's not very surprising. But I'm very intrigued by all different forms of arts and entertainment. And I've always had a little bit of mixed feelings about, well, I have a couple different things I wanted to talk about, but as soon as I started talking about music and movies, that popped into my head something I was thinking about making a video about this morning, which I never did, and it was about violent movies, and I guess that's a good way to ease into this. When I was younger, I loved watching movies like Predator, you know, violent movies, and it seems like in the 80s and 90s, sure, there was a lot of blood and gore, but it morphed into something worse. It became this shock value type entertainment where it was almost about, you know, how much blood and gore could you show. And this morning I was watching a movie, and the movie was obviously millions of dollars, probably hundreds of millions of dollars spent on it. You know how movies are. It was a random show on HBO, and it was called The Kingsman, The Inner Circle. And usually I don't watch movies in the morning, but I couldn't help myself. And it was just so damn violent, you know. They were just glamorizing violence, but not just that, but even something as simple as him going in, you know, a guy going into a control room and there's some people working there and, you know, hurting innocent bystanders, but, you know, all in the cause of, you know, saving the day and getting the bad guy. You know, what they call, I guess, collateral damage, if you will. But anyhow, off topic. I went through a period a couple of years ago where I was so disgusted by violence in movies that I just couldn't watch any of it. That was when I was kind of going through this Eastern Buddhist kind of phase where I was like trying to separate myself from the negativity of the world. And it's one of the most valuable lessons that I learned over the past, you know, my life, I guess, would be that if you lean too far in any one direction, whether it be towards violence or away from violence, you will eventually be faced with it, one way or another. We have to cope with what comes our way. Many of us have never faced any real adversity in our lives, and beyond losing loved ones or having an accident, but living in a war zone is something that can, you know, cause lifelong trauma, but it can also strengthen people's resolve and give them gratitude for existence. You know, it just seems some of the poorest communities tend to be some of the most accepting, right? Not always, but the idea that movies have to, you know, let me just, because I want to get into the music thing, you know, but movies bring out an emotion in us because they tell a story. And if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and the idea that all stories are based on the same basic outline. You know, the hero finds a situation where he, you know, is faced with a challenge, and then he has to go beat that challenge, and then his adversary almost kills him, but he defeats him, and then he becomes stronger for it, and then he becomes humbled by his experience. All of these things are, I think, the lifelong journey that we all face. And during that journey, when we're arts and entertainment are a way of us expressing ourselves and the things that we've learned. So there are a lot of people who are very opposed to Hollywood because they say, look, they're just almost like they're a prophecy. Like, look, they're showing us what they're going to do or what the future's going to be like. But really, for the most part, these are, you know, these innovators. Even Kubrick were just, you know, geniuses that put their art into film. And you could say the same thing, I guess, about Orwell. George Orwell wrote about the atomic bomb, you know, decades before, but he also was speaking with the top officials that were working on a bomb. But in his book, the bombs exploded for days or weeks. Nobody quite knew how that would turn out. So anyhow, he reflected that in the books that he wrote, and same with Animal Farm in 1984. When people say, look, they knew this was going to happen, of course we did. Humans have always used movies and arts to reflect our idea of what's going to happen in the future, or at least we tried. We kind of screwed up around the, you know, from the 70s and 80s and the whole Star Trek generation, you know. We had our eyes in the sky at that time because we had landed on the moon. We figured, of course, we're going to go to space. That's going to be our priority. But, you know, maybe in 100 years. But right now, we're still working on figuring out, you know, the Earth. So anyhow, telling these stories is, I guess, for the movie part, because I want to finish that out so I can get into the other arts. I still enjoy watching a good movie or a good television show. I see that there's so much effort put into it, and at the same time, to finalize what I was saying earlier about that movie, The Kingsman, it was just horrible because there was just so much violence, but also because it's built for entertainment, not to tell a real story that is important. And I guess that's why the movie sucked to me. That it's not there to... It's just the same old repeating story. There's a bad guy. They're doing something. It's just mindless entertainment, basically. You know, CIA 007 type thing where the gadgets they have are just ridiculous. You know, like a baseball bat that's a mine detector and a baseball that's a grenade. And I'm like, who the fuck is going to carry this stuff? But when they open the case, there's like these baseball bats and these knives and all this stuff in the case, and they're all backlit with like LEDs shining down from each one. Like, who the hell would make something like that? You know, it's just ridiculous. But every time I see something like that, I realize that's what the people like. So moving into music, that's basically, that's the pop music of the movie world, is movies like that. And pop music is basically just the same old formula, repeating beat and tones over and over and over, the same format, and the people keep buying it up. And as soon as a generation gets tired of crappy pop music, another generation comes up to consume it. So it's always a revolving door. There's continuously new people coming in. And when I was younger, I got into bands like Led Zeppelin, Grateful Dead, Black Sabbath, Metallica, Megadeth. When I listened to Metallica, for example, you know, when my parents would hear that, they'd be like, "Oh God, how can you listen to that crap? They're just, they're not even saying words." And I'd hear adults say that they're not even saying words, and I started listening closer. Oh, wow! I bought the cassette and I looked inside and read the lyrics. I said, "Wow, it does talk about some harsh stuff." But wait a minute, it's talking about anti-war. It's speaking about how the soldier's made of clay. It's not that he's supporting the war or killing. Then I listened to Slayer, and there's a song like Mandatory Suicide, for example, and it just sounds horrible when you hear it. But if you understand the meaning behind the song, you can say, well, you know, it may still be a horrible song, but it has a meaning, a noble meaning to an extent. I can't think of all the examples, of course, and I don't want to right now. I listened to everything, even back then, NWA, and I thought, wow, these guys are hardcore. Fuck the Police, wow. You know, but the music told a story of every generation coming up. And even the hardcore gangster rap, to me, was like, you know, it was some of the realest music out there. And the truth is, country was also real music in a lot of regards, but that became pop. Then rap became pop. And then everything became telling someone else's story. And so it became more like movies. Not really telling your own story. It's telling other stories. And repeating the same story because it's safe and it's comfortable. To move from movies and music into the art world, we're looking at the same problem. The art world, though, and I'm not talking about what you might call like gallery art, because many of these prestigious painters, the types that can sell their work for millions of dollars that are still alive, it's ludicrous to think that anybody's work is worth that much. I personally don't see it, but it's been shown over and over that most of the large art sales are used to launder and move large amounts of money. That it's seldom about the art piece itself, but a way for people to, you know, buy things and use money that otherwise, you know, won't go into the details on that, it's not worth it. But beyond that, there's a true art world out there of true artists who paint amazing pieces. You might even just see them at markets, you know, they might not even have their art anywhere on display. Art can be fairly expensive, of course, but it shouldn't be millions of dollars. But to each his own. That's a different world is what I'm saying. And that's not to discount some of the amazing paintings by, artists long gone that are very rare. And of course, it's a collection like anything else for some people. There are people who look at art and buy art to look at. There are people who buy art to put in vaults and lockers. There are people who buy records so they can store them away in crates and seal them away from dust and never play them. And say, look, I have this limited edition LP with a custom sleeve in there. And you say, well, that's great. But, I love the same formats, but I like to use it. So, anyhow, I'm jumping around because basically I'm just talking about the arts. And how much of it is out there to make money and how much of it is done for the love. So much of art is done for the love. Even making, movies, which, bring in billions, but they are still art pieces. In other words, it's ridiculous how much money is put into movies. It's ridiculous how much money is spent on just a pointless setup for a 2-second scene. But it's, in a way, our generation or our society saying, look at what we can do. I feel the same way about artistic structures, especially artistic buildings that are just ridiculously built. I've always had this thing like, if you're going to build something, build it structurally sound in a way that functions. But at the same time, I can respect the architecture, the achievement of saying, look what we've done. Bigger isn't better, but bigger is badass. It's different, like building the bigger temples in the ancient world, larger statues. It was always the thing. It's different when it's about ego, like I've got a taller building than you. And I guess that's the last facet I wanted to talk about, is the competition. If you are building an amazing structure and someone else is too, and you can look and share each other's, look at each other's structure and say, dude, that's great, and support each other, I think that's phenomenal. That's a society I want to see. And that's what I think that art forms can be. But of course, in the movie industry is cutthroat. The music industry is cutthroat. But not just that, even individual artists talk shit about each other, in the sense that for the most part, people support one another. Hey, it's a fellow musician. But whether it be in the art world or in the music world, there's people whispering behind others' backs instead of, putting out support for other artists. And I guess that's the metaphor that I'm thinking of for, how we treat one another in general. I understand the idea of wanting to keep up with the Joneses, the idea of wanting to get ahead a little bit in the world and make a little bit of money and do your thing. What I can't understand is how people can, do it, forsake others and treat others with disrespect, who are also trying to contribute amazing works in their lives, because it keeps people down who otherwise. Some of the people who have the most to contribute in that realm tend to be the most sensitive about their arts or about their, wisdom. There are some, let's just put it this way, it takes a little bit of crazy to make amazing art. That's just how I feel about it. I don't feel like what you would call normal people are very much into crazy art projects. It takes a different type of mind. It's not better or worse. It's not bad or good. It's just what it is. In other words, call it a little bit of, somewhere on the ASD, the autism spectrum, scale, what you might call maybe a little bit of Asperger's sprinkled in here, and a little bit of OCD over here, and a little ADD over here. I know because I have it. I have these feelings. I have a little bit of, I guess it would be mild Tourette's as well, a variety of different, anxieties and issues in my own life, but for the most part I consider myself a pretty normal person. But it's those manic moments which I've been the most inspired, whether I've been influenced by something in my life. I write a song because I feel frustrated about something, or because I feel really happy about something. And that's what I love about music. And really, this is the last part of this. I was going to do a separate video just talking about music and emotion, but I'm just going to put it here because I'm thinking about it. Music real music. I'm talking Grateful Dead, for example. You know, they didn't write all their songs. They played a lot of other people's songs. Bob Dylan wrote a lot of songs for them, and they played with other bands. They never... Anytime you see one of the bands, you know, the greatest bands of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you never hear about the Dead because they were always in the background. But they had a consistent following for decades, and they were very humble in the way that they played. You know, it wasn't flashy or fancy. It was just about having a good time. And the stories that they told are the reason why people came back. The stories weren't always their own. The stories were often the hero's journey, or singing about, you know, the 1800s, working out in the coal mines or the, you know, oil fields, whatever it might be. These were the stories that resonated with everyone. And the thing that crossed my mind this morning, I guess that inspired me to even make this video at all, was a question, a simple question. It's that, can music be emotional in its own right? In other words, when we hear what we would call a sad song or a happy song, is that something that the vibrations tell us in a way? Or is it something that we could feel in our hearts, rather? Or is it something that we've learned, a behavior that we've learned over time? And I've thought about this a lot. And I thought, you know, when you hear a sad symphony, you might associate that song with, you know, some of the tragedies, the tragedy plays of the past, or within movies where it's been used in that context. When you hear a flute playing in a little happy song, you can tell it's happy because you've seen it on a frickin' car commercial or something, or people use it when they're, you know, doing happy videos on YouTube, like those stupid repeating songs you just hear everywhere. But outside of our interpretation of it, is it really happy or sad? Can music really convey an emotion without first learning music? And I'll leave that, I guess, for another one, because it's complicated. I guess what I'm trying to get across, you know, the musical scales aren't just for music. They are also found in other places in nature. It seems that the harmonic frequencies that we can hear, the audible, you know, tones that we hear in the octaves, are repeated in the quantum, in the micro and the macro realm. Fascinated with frequencies and the way that we interpret them as, you know, one thing or another. But I'm going to do a separate video about this because I'm going to do one about chaos in a minute. So I just wanted to get this one out, talk about arts, and really get everybody else's opinion on whether, you know, is Hollywood poison, or is it helping us to understand the story a little better, even if it is completely full of shit? If we select the good ones from the bad, you know. It's the same way with music. You hear an amazing artist that tells an amazing story. You can't say that, well, music all sucks and they're all satanic, and they're, you know, because of some Hollywood pop star that, you know, sings about the Illuminati, and because that's what people want to hear, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like this circle of trying to understand arts and music, and whether or not they are a, you know, I guess you utilize it like a tool, right? Benefit or risk depends on the use. Anyhow, I'm rambling. That's what I do best. Talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day.